Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. Maybe we'll just quickly start by if everybody can mute their mics or make sure that their mics are muted, that would be great. Just don't want any feedback to start. That'd be great. I could just hear a little bit of feedback happening, but otherwise, I think we are good to go. We'll talk a little bit about housekeeping. We'll talk a little bit about what you can expect from this presentation today. So I'll just dive right in. My name is Jessica Brandon. I'm the Director of Education and Training here at ACT Alberta, and I really do feel just so honored to be here today. This work and meeting and learning with folks from all over the world is just so it's really inspiring for me. And so thank you. Thanks for being here. Thanks for taking the time to come and learn about labor, exploitation, racism, and migrant rights. Importantly, as you can imagine by just seeing the title here on the screen, these topics can be upsetting. So if you need to step away, if you need to take a breath, please do so. Do whatever you need to best care for yourself during this presentation. There's absolutely no shame, no judgment here. So please just know that. Labor exploitation, racism, and migrant rights are interconnected in many complex ways, with each, of course, influencing and reinforcing the other. So the relationships between these issues are often rooted in systemic structures, historical contexts, and power dynamics. And so I hope that I can really try and start to break it down for you today with a special focus around forced labor, which is our special our subject matter expertise here at ACT Alberta. And before we begin our discussion on, of course, these critical issues, I do want to acknowledge my privilege as a white woman addressing these topics. I understand that my experiences and my perspectives may not fully encompass the lived experience faced by marginalized communities. However, I am committed to learning, listening, and amplifying voices that often go unheard in these conversations. It's crucial for me right now to recognize the advantages that I have had and to use them to advocate for a more equitable and just society. So thank you for just hearing me there. So a quick note about language for the presentation that you'll be listening in on and participating hopefully today. You'll hear me say words like client, victim, and survivor today. Client is someone who's receiving supports here at ACT Alberta. And ACT Alberta, I'll jump in just a little bit in a couple of slides to let you know who we are at ACT Alberta. It stands for the Action Coalition on Human Trafficking. We've been doing this work for about 15 years. And so I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a minute, but I do want to just talk to you about the language that you'll hear. So the terms victim and survivor are often self-identified by people who've experienced trafficking to best align with their preference. However, for today's presentation, I will be saying victim when the trafficking is ongoing. I'll say survivor when I'm referring to someone who has been trafficked in the past. And through the next 90 minutes, you and I will have some different responsibilities. So as a participant, I would absolutely love for your attention, your openness to discomfort and new ideas. And if you're comfortable, I again, would love your participation. So that will be through the chat feature here on Hopin. And I'll give you the prompt when we can jump on in. Sometimes it can get a little bit messy with unmuting mics. So that's why we're going to use the chat feature. My role as a facilitator is to share knowledge around this tricky topic. That really means that if something isn't clear, or if maybe I'm going too fast, or you need further understanding, this is where it's my job to make that happen. So if you need further explanation to understand, please let me know after the presentation how I can assist. If you don't mind just kind of jotting down what you would like to better understand, I would love to connect with you afterwards. We do have lots of content to get through today. However, if my microphone cuts out or if there's like a significant glitch, please do unmute your microphone to let me know about this issue. Otherwise, we're good to go. All questions and comments it would be great if we can save those until the end of the presentation, aside from the prompts that I give you throughout. And then when we're participating using that chat box, there will be contributions. When you give your contributions, it's totally fine that they're guesses. There really is no there are no wrong answers right now. So learning is just very important. And yeah, would just love to hear from everybody. Amazing. So the greatest sign of vulnerability in participation is to speak up, even if you're not sure. So I'm really excited to see kind of where we can all get today and grow together in that way. So let's dive in. A land acknowledgement. So ACT Alberta respectfully acknowledges the traditional and ancestral lands and traveling routes of the diverse Indigenous peoples represented here in Alberta in Treaty 4, 6, 7, 8, and 10 territory, and the home of the Métis regions 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, who also share a deep connection with these lands. We are grateful to work, live, and learn on ancestral territory of the Cree, the Dene, Blackfoot, Saulteaux, and Nakota, Sioux, and Métis people who are the original caretakers of this land and whose histories, languages, and cultures continue to influence our vibrant community. We're so grateful for the traditional knowledge keepers and elders who are still with us today, and those who've gone before us. We make this acknowledgement as an act of reconciliation and gratitude to those whose territory we reside on or are visiting. So we acknowledge the history of this land, and we are thankful for the opportunity to walk together in friendship, where we will encourage and promote positive change for present and future generations. All right, trafficking in media. So typically we're doing this on Zoom or on MS Teams, and I don't know if there's a raise your hand option through Zoom, so you can turn on your camera at this point. Please, if you can just, through your camera, raise your hand if you've heard about human trafficking through maybe a movie or a TV show, or maybe a news story, podcast, documentary, and so on. Yeah, let's see a couple of hands. You can turn on, don't be shy, you can turn on your video. Awesome, right? So we see trafficking. It definitely appears in the media. I'm sure many of you have heard. It's typically more so around sex trafficking. Today we are more so going to touch on labor trafficking and that topic. But I do want to just kind of touch on the trafficking in media piece, because we at ACT have an interesting relationship with these portrayals. Although the stories can be very compelling and they're often extremely emotional, they are not always representative of how trafficking shows up in real life, as you can imagine. And this really can contribute to the perpetuation of racism in several ways. So first, there's stereotyping and misrepresentation. I'm sure many of you have witnessed this in media. It often really relies on stereotypes when depicting victims and perpetrators of human trafficking. So we know that that can really reinforce existing racial biases and contribute to the stigmatization of certain ethnic or racial groups. For example, if a particular group is consistently portrayed as either victims or perpetrators, it can lead to that reinforcement of negative stereotypes. Second, selective coverage. This is a big one. So media may and often does disproportionately cover cases involving victims of specific racial or ethnic backgrounds, reinforcing the idea that human trafficking is more prevalent in certain communities, right? This selective coverage really does contribute to the further marginalization of these communities. And it really creates a distorted perception of the issue. And on top of that, it can prevent folks from wanting to report to agencies such as ours or wanting to report to law enforcement. So that's just an important side note. We'll talk a little bit about that in a few minutes. Then third, cultural sensationalism. So sometimes media coverage can sensationalize certain aspects of human trafficking cases, focusing on, again, the cultural or ethnic background of the individuals involved rather than addressing those broader systemic issues. This can very well lead to the perception that human trafficking is inherently linked to specific cultures or races. Fourth, the white savior complex. In some narratives, media can portray individuals from privileged backgrounds, often representing Western cultures, as the saviors or the rescuers of victims from less privileged backgrounds. We very much see that in the most recent movie, Sound of Freedom. That came out, I think, a few months ago. But this does really reinforce a narrative of superiority, and that can contribute to the perception that certain racial or ethnic groups need to be saved by others. Fifth, and this is the last point before we move on, criminalization and racial profiling. Media coverage can contribute to the criminalization of certain communities by associating them with human trafficking without addressing, again, the underlying socioeconomic factors that contribute to that vulnerability. And this can result in racial profiling, and it does, where individuals from, again, specific racial or ethnic backgrounds are unfairly targeted as potential traffickers or potential victims. So yeah, just a quick note about media. It's tough. We really hope that to combat these issues, truly it's crucial for media outlets to approach trafficking stories with sensitivity and really avoiding that reinforcement of stereotypes that I talked about for the last 5 minutes. But truly, additionally, media professionals really do need to be aware of the potential impact that this coverage can have on perpetuating racism and stigma. And really, I think it would be just so important to strive to highlight those systemic factors that are contributing to human trafficking rather than focusing solely on individual cases. And as a reflection of that, the following is a quote from Simone Bell, who is a survivor of human trafficking. They said, "I felt totally minimized and not sensational enough to be part of the discussion. It's the everyday people and the everyday stories that are important because these stories provide the nuances of the phenomena and will lead to real insight into prevention, intervention, and restoration strategies." All right, and so a bit about us here at ACT Alberta. We are a frontline serving agency that helps victims and survivors of human trafficking on their path to safety. Since 2008, we've been the only agency here in Alberta that is inclusive to all types and experiences of human trafficking. That includes working with men, women, trans, and gender diverse folks, undocumented persons and foreign nationals, LGBTQ plus populations, people with disabilities, sex workers. The only group that we don't serve currently are children and youth under the age of 18. And that's not because these folks don't experience trafficking, but it's because this group is covered, fairly well covered under a few different forms of legislation and criminal code. One is the Alberta legislation that's specific to our province called the Protection of Sexually Exploited Children's Act, and government services are also responsible for managing their care. At this time, we do have offices in Edmonton and Calgary and projects that we run throughout the province, bringing training, access, and awareness to traditionally underserved areas. A little bit more about ACT Alberta before we dive back in. Our vision is an Alberta free of human trafficking. We do aim to do that by supporting and advocating for victims and survivors of human trafficking, increasing knowledge and awareness of all forms of human trafficking, leading and fostering collective action through collaboration and respect. We believe that every person deserves the right to their own autonomy and self-determination, which is why we work every day to provide a path to safety for those that we serve. And quickly, our values. So we are a person-centered agency driven by human rights. And that means that we meet our clients where they're at. I'm so sorry if you can hear the beeping. Oh, it just stopped. It sounded like there was a truck backing up outside. My apologies if that was very distracting. It was distracting for me. So sorry, a person-centered agency is kind of how we identify meeting our clients where they're at and really helping them to get to where they want to be, whether or not they want to report to law enforcement, report their trafficker, whether or not they want to remain in the sex industry, and whether or not they want to stay in Canada. We really are committed to serving and empowering all individuals without oppression. So we pride ourselves in offering evidence-based and judgment-free intersectional services. And lastly, we build collective action through the coordination, collaboration, and respect of stakeholders and allies. We have so many amazing people and partners throughout Alberta that we have the privilege of working with together to provide really comprehensive wraparound care, because we just can't do it on our own. So like you all here today, we can all be a part of that solution. All right, so for today, we'll hear a story of labor exploitation in Alberta to try to guide us through this learning. The character is not real. However, the experiences definitely reflect stories that we often hear from survivors of human trafficking at ACT Alberta. Please be aware that the content you'll hear throughout can be distressing and difficult. So I do invite, again, I invite discomfort because it is a powerful way to learn. However, please do monitor your own level of discomfort and what you need to do to care for yourself, okay? Please, that would be great. So we've got, sorry, I'm gonna hop into Dev. Typically we do 2 case studies. One is around sex trafficking, one is around labor trafficking. And Anna's story is the sex trafficking case study, but we're just going to be focusing on labor trafficking today. So let's meet Dev. He is 24, he's ambitious, he's grown up in India with a loving family that was just short on resources. Dev has moved many times and lived without the luxuries that he's desired. When he hears about an agency that can offer him a high salary and quality of life as a construction worker in Canada, he starts to make arrangements. He tells his family that he will be able to support them, and hopefully they can all be together in Canada in a few years. Now that we've met our storyteller, let's talk about how we understand human trafficking. Perhaps it's best to start with the definition, of course, and forgive me if many of you are already familiar with this. We have paraphrased it because the UN definition of human trafficking, or the Palermo Protocol, is quite lengthy. So more simply put, human trafficking is the act of forcing, coercing, or deceiving an individual into selling sex or labor to a third party's gain. The definition can be broken down because it was quite wordy. We really like to see it broken down in the action, means, and purpose model. So traffickers need to do something to their victim, which is the action, right? So that's transfer, transportation, receipt, harboring, or recruitment. And then they need to use methods of control, right? Which is the means, and that's just how they're controlling their victim. It could look like threats, it could look like abduction. It doesn't always mean, often, again, it could be portrayals in the media, it could be just presumed human trafficking, but often it does, folks think it's like windowless van abductions, or whips and chains and all of that kind of gory stuff. But sometimes it is just fraud and deception, sometimes force, sometimes coercion, could be threats of deportation, right? So we'll talk a little bit about that in a minute, but purpose, of course, is the last piece of the puzzle here. And that is for some intended reason, right? The purpose is the reason to the trafficker's benefit, or that intended reason. So whether it's forced labor, forced organ removal, sexual exploitation, servitude, slavery. There are many more, but these are the more common pieces that we see through ACT Alberta. You might be wondering, what are the number of applicable words in each category, since there are multiple in each of the bubbles you see up here on the screen. So here it is. So long as there is one action word, one means word, and one purpose word, we often will determine that case to have reached the threshold of human trafficking. So we move forward, we do an intake. Yes, this is a case of human trafficking. So if it's not fully clear yet, it'll be very clear by the end of the presentation. But essentially, it's just saying traffickers undertake actions using means for the purpose of exploiting people. So Dev excitedly read the pamphlets about his new adventure, written in his native Hindi because his English is limited. He'd be coming to Canada on something called a temporary foreign worker permit, and he'd be sponsored by his new company. His is a closed work permit. That means that he would only be able to legally stay and work in Canada if he remained an employee at this particular company. So little red flag there, just keep that in your mind. Being stuck or like tied to a certain employer. So Dev wasn't worried though, because he had always thought of himself as a hardworking and loyal person. As a perk, he learned that the company would provide him with living arrangements and 2 meals a day. So Dev said a bittersweet goodbye to his family and boarded the plane. After the long flights, a tired Dev was shown to his new living space, an old 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom home with 5 other men living there already. Dev was sure that the boss didn't respond to his questions about the home and his pay simply because maybe he just didn't use the right English words to communicate. He'd try again tomorrow. In the morning, he was awoken at 5:30 and worked 12 hours with only a single 20-minute break. After 3 weeks, Dev began to lose hope as the cycle continued. His housemates like his housemates, sorry, Dev's passport was being held by the boss, and Dev knew that his permit would not allow him to find a different employer. I know that it is a lot of difficult information, and it's hard to hear stories of abuse. When you're ready, please use the chat feature to guess the action, means, and purpose that Dev experienced. So kind of what you heard in his story. Now, I will put them up here on the screen so you've got a bit of a cheat sheet. Action, means, and purpose. So take a peek. Please just head into the chat and let me know, what did you hear in his story? What action has he experienced? What means has he experienced? And what purpose did he experience? And I'm going to ask, for whatever reason, I'm unable to see the chat now. It kind of disappeared and I'm scared to touch anything. I don't want I really don't want to mess up the screen. Oh, my slideshow stopped working. Shoot. Okay. Thank you, Bianca, for letting me know that. Let me just, I might just stop sharing and reshare. Sorry, everybody. That's bizarre. Okay. Just one moment. I'm so sorry. But please do feel free to jump into the chat anyway, and we can talk about the action, means, and purpose. Yeah, I'm just gonna, can everybody see that now? The action, means, and purpose back on the screen? Aisha, I see. Okay, yeah, you can? Okay, amazing. I'm going to just quickly start the slideshow again. I'm so sorry. Okay. I hope that this works. Okay. We're good to go. Action, means, and purpose. Okay. I'm hoping so. Amazing. Great. Okay. So now that you have the cheat sheet up and we can kind of pop into the chat, what did Dev experience? What action did he experience? What means and what purpose? I think we all know that the purpose is, of course, forced labor, but maybe there's others. So feel free to pop into the chat. And Aisha, could I actually get you, would you mind kind of speaking the answers out that you are seeing come through the chat? That would be super helpful. I think you're muted. Amazing. Sorry?
Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Sorry, it's probably really loud in my background. I'm at a cafe right now, so probably not the best spot to choose, but I'm here all day studying and joining in on chat, so yeah.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Thank you for having me. I mean, in terms of action, I would definitely say, he went through the recruitment process. And then from there, under means, the force, I think the means and the purpose kind of go hand by hand in terms of the forced labor that he was then forced into. But not only
Absolutely.
that, but, the forced where he's residing now, living, and the lifestyle that he's kind of now being forced into, rather than having, let's say, a more normal 8-hour workday and, ample amount of rooms and beds to stay in and things like that.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. That is awesome. Is there anything else? Oh, I'm seeing in the chat, have folks kind of written their guesses and responses in there as well?
Yes, here I had so Sean said action, recruitment, under means, threats.
Amazing.
And then threats and coercion, and then under purpose they put forced labor.
Amazing.
Yeah, and it's pretty much the same. Everyone's pretty much put the same thing across the board there.
Okay, so everyone has very much caught on. Perfect. This is fantastic. Thank you so much, Aisha, for jumping in. Sorry to put you on the spot. Really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. Yeah, so you should feel proud and confident in your ability to just notice the hallmark aspects of trafficking. Thank you. Thanks for your participation, and we'll keep kind of going with that participation in the next couple of slides. So as we identify together, human trafficking uses an action, means, and purpose, but what are the other aspects that are important? Let's jump into international versus domestic. One way to categorize trafficking is that international versus domestic typology. So in an international trafficking situation like Dev's, a person is brought from one country to another. Dev was brought from India to Canada legally through the Temporary Foreign Workers Program. It's possible that trafficked persons will enter Canada illegally or without status. However, ACT's clients are most often in Canada on some kind of permit. And so you may notice that this is a myth that we see in media. Our international survivors are most often from India, Mexico, and the Philippines. And that really does align with Canada's Temporary Foreign Worker Program. So it makes sense. In a domestic trafficking situation, we will see that the trafficked person is not brought across a country's borders. They could remain in the same location for the entire time, right? Or they may be brought to different locations within the nation. And we saw in a lot of ACT Alberta sex trafficking cases, we see more domestic trafficking where the trafficker will kind of take someone from, let's say, Saskatoon to Edmonton, or, you know, from one province to the next, from one city to the next. So that's more so what we see with domestic trafficking. And on the topic of domestic trafficking, there are certain routes that traffickers use that to kind of circulate their victims, which often cross provincial or territorial borders. This happens commonly for a number of reasons. It isolates the victim from the supports in their life that may help them get out of the trafficking situation. It also avoids law enforcement that may have been alerted to the location of origin. And sadly, in sex trafficking cases, there can be an increased demand for victims who are new to the area as a function of the novelty effect. And we won't get into that today. We do have a focus on labor trafficking today, but if you do want any more information around that, you'll have my email at the end, and you're more than welcome to message me, and I'd be happy to send you resources. Sorry, so this was actually, it didn't populate until just now, but these were the routes and kind of corridors that the traffickers use here in Canada. And those, yeah, you'd see like those little dotted red lines are via highway, and the black lines are air travel typically. All right, so let's look together to see if we can compare human smuggling with exploitation or human trafficking, as they are often confused. So for those of you who are unfamiliar, or maybe want a reminder, human smuggling happens when someone pays another person to transport them across international borders. And when that payment is made and the border is crossed, that smuggling relationship, and again, this is just by definition, so this is not saying that trafficking can't happen to somebody who's been smuggled, but this is in the ideal scenario, that smuggling relationship should end, and that person should be able to kind of move about their life in the new country. So as you all know, by this point, human trafficking requires an action, a means, and a purpose. If we look in these categories to see which words apply when it comes to human trafficking, we can come across words like transfer, transportation, receipt, and possibly harboring, right? So those are all action words. But if the person has voluntarily been transported, then there wouldn't have been any means, right? There wouldn't be anything from that middle bubble like threat, abduction, or force, right? And so on. So since the exchange of service is for money and it ends after that exchange, there is no planned exploitation. And again, by definition, in an ideal smuggling scenario, that there is no exploitation planned of that person. And of course, the having to, be smuggled into another country is an entirely different presentation altogether. Of course, running and trying to escape from another country that it has, perpetuated violence and racism and all of the things that kind of follow, and the reasons why folks opt for smuggling, that's an entirely different presentation, unfortunately, but it is really important to know that human trafficking and human smuggling are quite different. And again, I will reiterate that because of the precarity of being smuggled across the border and perhaps coming into a country where maybe there's not a job lined up. It was just a matter of getting here so that safety is acquired. I mean, of course, there's more vulnerability. Where there is vulnerability, often there is exploitation. And so that is the unfortunate piece here, is that we can say, well, human smuggling is this by definition and human trafficking is this by definition. However, they can very much cross paths, and they do. So that is important to note. But if we are talking about human smuggling and human trafficking, they are very different things, because there is an element of consent when it comes to human smuggling. And just on top of that as well, human smuggling is a crime against the state, whereas human trafficking is a crime against the person. And so that's kind of what I take with me, and that makes them very different things. So moving on to other classifications of trafficking, we know that there are many types and reasons for exploitation, including sexual exploitation, forced labor, forced organ removal, child soldiers, forced marriage, illegal adoption, the list goes on. But that said, in Canada, and specifically in Alberta, we primarily see human trafficking for forced labor and sexual exploitation. But of course, please, if you would like more information on any of the others that I mentioned, feel free to send me an email and I'll provide you with additional resources. So labor trafficking, otherwise known as forced labor or labor exploitation, that's the control and exploitation of a person for their labor or service. And usually that's through force, threats, and or deception. There are key risk factors that I just have put up here on the screen. And these are risk factors that are associated typically with labor exploitation, and recent migration is the first one. The second one is economic hardship. Relocation can be something that kind of goes along with that. Financial insecurity and unstable housing. In the study, there's a study called In the Shadows, Living and Working Without Status in Alberta. This was released in 2020. We learn that migrant workers face significant challenges when coming to Canada. And we kind of heard that, of course, in Dev's story, valid permits or not. But many pay large fees to recruiters, sometimes over $10,000. I mean, we've had clients with even more debt because of these large fees to recruiters who are not, what's the word? Regulated. Thank you. There we go. They're not regulated, unfortunately. And so when folks arrive, many experience exploitation and racism at the hands of employers, and their legal status is frequently at risk. Migrant workers in Canada are vulnerable to exploitation at work due to their limited citizenship rights, marginalization in the community, and dependency on the employer, right? We talked about that closed work permit. If you are in a country that is not a country that you grew up in, and you are just dependent on one employer, just imagine, put yourself in the shoes of Dev. That further dependency, that further, it's just further isolation, really. And so to go further, when migrant workers lose their formal working status, that vulnerability to exploitation increases, right? Because you can't always trust that your employer is going to keep your that work permit going, right? And so undocumented migrant workers have greater difficulty finding and keeping work. And when they do find work, it's often they experience difficult working conditions. And so when confronted with exploitation, undocumented migrant workers have little to no recourse through formal enforcement processes due to the status precarity. It's a vicious cycle. The experiences of undocumented workers in Alberta are in part a consequence of failed policies. We see that Canada's approach to migrant labor has never been a well thought out plan. It's been kind of a series of hasty decisions where those long-term consequences have not been considered, and those human costs are invisible. It really is long overdue that Canada considers the consequences of these decisions on those most affected, and that is the migrant worker themselves. The reality is that successive governments broke a promise that's made to these migrant workers, They are told that, you're needed. Please come to Canada. We are a friendly, loving country. You can perhaps even, it's implied that you can stay here if you worked hard enough. And, if that is the case, then maybe you can stay permanently. Yet, unfortunately, when the consequences of bad policy and poor enforcement become impossible to ignore, that message changed, right? And so suddenly, migrant workers are the ones to blame somehow for their exploitation, and they are at fault for the downturn in the economy, et cetera, et cetera. And then, of course, so it seems that welcome mat is removed. And there's that anti-immigration sentiment that that lies pretty, it's quiet, and it lies kind of close to the surface. And so to reflect that, this is a video by the International Labour Organization on forced labor. Please be aware that it does show exploitative and harsh treatment of workers. So please take care of yourself as you watch. I do want to note that this video, it does have music, and it just hasn't been working, unfortunately, on Hopin. So this, I'll post the link to this video. It's just a YouTube video. I'll post the link after the presentation if you want to watch it again with the music. But this is it. Please let me know if for some reason you can't see it or if it stops working though. Thank you. So from the available experience and data, we know that the most common sectors that have cases of labor trafficking can be the following that you'll see here on the list. We can imagine that individuals who come to Canada for any one of these opportunities are experiencing them within these sectors. So the 10 most common, the 10 most common sectors containing, I think somebody's unmuted. Sorry, if you can.
Oh, you know what? Sorry, Jessica. I just wanted to say something really quickly.
Yeah. Please.
I don't know if you can see the group, the chat. So
I can.
Mark just put something in, and he said, Uber is creating modern slavery with its AI coordinating everything for profit maximization. They are reversing 200 years of labor protections with gig economic changes. These digital platforms are exploiting the vulnerable globally. We need a global worker on corporative social enterprise apps of our own, is what Mark just put in the group chat.
Perfect. Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I appreciate that. I would agree. And if it's okay, what we'll do with the chat is just at the very end, once we're kind of through everything, I'll go through the questions, and then I will be able to I'll shut down the presentation so that I can move into the chat and start answering questions. Yeah, so sorry. It's just a little bit hard to get. For whatever reason, the chat just doesn't show up on my screens. So yes, if it's okay, unless something is very urgent, we'll just kind of work into the questions at the end. I'll make sure that we've got enough time to get through all of them. And please do, if you don't feel comfortable throwing your questions in the chat, I would be more than happy to send my email, and you can reach out to me that way, and we can chat further for sure. Okay, thank you so much, Aisha. So from the available experience and data, we kind of talked about this. So these are the most common sectors containing labor trafficking. So we've got domestic work, agriculture, restaurants and food services, construction and trades, which we heard about in Dev's story, peddling and begging, hotels and hospitality, factories and manufacturing, traveling sales crews, landscaping, arts and sports entertainment. Oh, sorry. And those are, again, these are just the top 10. It's not an exhaustive list. I also want to point out that labor trafficking doesn't only take place in underground or shady businesses. It could be the person who handed you your breakfast sandwich this morning. And it could very well be in places that you visit as a customer, perhaps, that restaurant or that wherever you get your breakfast sandwich. It could be a hotel, it could be an entertainment venue. So it's really hidden in plain sight. So once in the labor trafficking scenario, there are common vulnerabilities experienced by ACT Alberta's clients. And so these are a couple of lists that we've put together just knowing and hearing from our clients what they've experienced. Often they just need a place to live, a job, and they want to financially support their families. So this makes individuals all the more reliant upon, an employer in so many ways. And so at the same time, they can experience violation, like what you see here in the next list. So commonly in labor trafficking, they can experience different workplace conditions than what they were promised, including excessive hours, safety concerns, and minimal access to breaks. So that's very important to just make note of. And we heard about this in Dev's story, right? And then a question that commonly arises when we hear about abuse is, well, why didn't they just leave? And it can be really difficult to hear a story that's deeply exploitive, whether it's a trafficking story, whether it's labor or sex trafficking, or perhaps it's a friend or a family member in an unhealthy romantic relationship, right? When we're an outsider looking in, it can be extremely hard for us to imagine being in a victim's shoes. And we're learning more about that so that together we can increase our understanding and empathy for victims of trafficking and exploitation. So the vulnerabilities we just spoke about are doubled down through the means, which I'll put up here on the screen. So what does that actually look like day to day? What do these threats, abduction, abuse of power, coercion, what do these things look like day to day? Well, Dev's employer held onto his passport, right? And that limited his access to travel. It limited his access to a human right, which is self-identification. Next, Dev's employer used threats of deportation, right? And claiming that if he didn't fulfill those 12 hours of labor per day, okay, well, you're deported then. And then additionally, there can be language barriers, right? Making it really difficult to move around in the city or hear of other perspectives or opportunities because that employer controls work and living arrangements. So just super isolating, right? So imagine being in Dev's situation with so little exposure to Canadian society. Dev likely doesn't know what his rights are as a worker in Canada. So despite the images we may think of around human trafficking, it's pretty clear to see that traffickers don't need chains. They don't need barred windows. They have ample power over their victims through practices and vulnerabilities like these. So on talking about vulnerabilities, how do we as community members recognize and help with these things? When we identify red flags, I mean, there's really not a list to memorize. It's much more important that if you are feeling that kind of prickly feeling like, oof, something is just not right here, we just always say, listen to that. And we'll talk a little bit later about what those steps can be if that does happen. But let's start by returning to means. So as a group with a ton of life experience, I can imagine, and knowledge, let's brainstorm in the chat how you think someone may present if they're experiencing any of these factors, right? So for example, those being defrauded, right? How could a person, if someone's been defrauded, perhaps they'll look skeptical or maybe they distrust promises, right? So what are some other words that come to mind or maybe phrases that come to mind when we think about Dev's scenario? So at various reactions to these means. How would you feel if you were being threatened? How would you feel if you were abducted, if there was an abuse of power happening, coercion, force? Yeah, so feel free in the chat, just feel free to maybe write a couple of words in there. If you can just put yourself in Dev's shoes. And I will ask either Aisha or Bianca, I have one of my coworkers here as well, if one of you can let me know what the answers in the chat are. I'm so sorry that it's just not working. Okay.
Yeah, so I myself put helpless or confused. Marie Gabrielle said scared / vulnerable. Chelsea said insecure, lacking self-confidence, defer to others. Sorry
Absolutely.
if I mispronounced your name. Yes, Wendy, powerless is what she put there. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we see that there are so many different reactions to, putting ourselves in Dev's shoes. And some of these words and phrases are things that we can experience as part of our daily lives, like feeling worried or defeated. And just imagine the intensification of that and experiencing, just experiencing what Dev's kind of gone through. So with that, the indicators we're talking about, they don't always point to trafficking. I do want to make note of that. There are a lot of other reasons why each of these things might happen. In combination, though, those indicators might be a cause for concern. And as we mentioned, if you do get that unsettled feeling in your gut, pay attention to that. But in general, some red flags that we see can be being controlled, no freedom to exit, signs of abuse, and fearful or despondent. And I know you may have heard some potential indicators of human trafficking from other sources, like perhaps the media, things like tattoos that are barcodes or very, other very obvious signs. But the reality is that a lot of exploitation may appear as victims may appear as average citizens, albeit living a very different life than you and I. But on top of that as well, I just want to make sure, we're not being alarmist here. Or using concern for human trafficking to further harm that's already happening to an already marginalized community, which is why we really want to focus instead on the broad elements that you can see on the slide here. So if you'd like to return to these slides when you receive, I believe you received the slide deck after the presentation, and I believe there's a recording available as well. You are more than welcome to do that. So the specific details I have just listed below, but for sake of time, I won't go through all of them. If you are a service provider, though, or perhaps like a nurse or a youth worker or healthcare, please do feel free to contact us here at ACT Alberta. We do provide tailored training specific to healthcare and a variety of other sectors. So please do feel free to reach out to me. So let's say you've noticed a few red flags. You've got that unsettled feeling. First, I will remind us all that there are a lot of other possible explanations for certain behaviors we might see as strange, right? So for example, someone may not be allowed to speak for themselves, but that could have to do with language differences, right? That language barrier we talked about that Dev had. There could be a possible disability, or maybe there's extreme social anxiety. So you could imagine that for other indicators, there are also alternative explanations. So we do really encourage at ACT Alberta to try and react to the situation in a helpful way, being mindful that we don't want to panic or do anything that might put a trafficked person or yourself into further harm. But more so than a specific set of obvious behaviors, we want to always remember our ever reliable 3-part model, which is the action, means, and purpose, right? And so if you do have a bad gut feeling and you notice a scenario where, these things could be happening, please do reach out for support. And again, this is the action, means, and purpose up here on the screen. Now, I'm not sure if, I'm assuming that not everybody here is located in Canada or even Alberta, but these are some ways to respond. And I did just want to put that into the presentation at this point because we are talking about response. So please feel free, again, you'll have a copy of this after today, but you can take a quick pic with your phone if you want to do that. This is the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline number in the middle. If you are located in Alberta, that is our direct line at ACT Alberta. On the top there, the 780 number. And if you are a resident of Canada, this is the point in time where I would highly recommend putting this 1-833-900-1010 number into your phone. The Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline is 24/7. They are multilingual and they are person and victim centered. So, and they have over 1,000 stakeholders across the country to be able to connect victims, to be able to connect law enforcement and community members to who they may need to be connected to in a time of need, in a time of crisis. So please do make note of that. And then, of course, a nearby authority figure is always a go-to as well. Let's see here. All right. So you may wonder, what are the available resources for survivors of human trafficking once they're connected to supports? What does that look like? And so we'll tell you a bit about how this happens at ACT Alberta. Once an individual is identified, we connect them to, they can be connected to us, and this is just kind of more specifically what happens within our organization, but we'll take initiative on providing supports and wraparound care. And we really allow for the survivor to make the decision themselves as we connect them. We give them, key resources that will meet their needs, especially those immediate needs like physical health, mental health, shelter, and maybe longer term needs like potential justice support or court support. We also provide case management, safety planning, guidance of the criminal justice system, counseling, therapy, immigration advocacy, and status regularization. That's something that we have a team of specialized social workers who sit and will assist throughout Alberta, will assist folks with things like that, especially important immigration advocacy and status regularization, among many other services that we provide, but that is kind of the one that I wanted to make front and center today. Okay. And sorry, I'm just checking here. Okay. I see that there are, I'm just going to go to the next slide here. I know that we've got some questions, so I do want to leave a good amount of time to answer those. So I'm just going to, we'll make sure that we stop at 11:30 just so we can have some discussion time. But in reality, it's unlikely that you'll cross paths with a trafficking situation and notice signs that'll allow you to intervene. Although, it may sound less impactful, the most consistent and effective way that all of us can help interrupt labor trafficking, racism, and have an impact on migrant rights is to be an advocate for members of your community who experience more vulnerabilities. And so that's by being an alert citizen who supports advocacy work, using your voice. Inclusive and non-oppressive policy is something that, advocating for that is a huge, policy takes a very long time to change, but it does change, albeit slow. And someone who listens respectfully to the stories from our peers with different backgrounds and experiences. By doing these things, we can really create a network that will leave others less isolated and less vulnerable. And thankfully, that means that this group today has already been doing so. So whether seen or unseen, when you fight for equity and dignity, you can make a difference. And so thank you so much for making our communities better and safer. Again, if you'd like to learn more, volunteer or get involved in other ways with some amazing organization and initiatives, I've listed a handful on the next slide. I'll leave it up for a little while we have our questions and comments. So please forgive me if I've missed anyone. This is like this. There are so many amazing organizations doing incredible work across Canada. And so these are just some of the folks that we partner with that I wanted to give some space here to. And again, please forgive me if I've missed anyone. But I do want to quickly point out the IRIS. You can kind of see it there on the right-ish side. That is an incredible program that I would highly recommend looking into. It is the ethical recruitment of migrant workers. And so it's an initiative to promote ethical recruitment. It's been created by IOM, and it's a coalition of partners from government all over the world, civil society, and the private sector. They are a global multi-stakeholder initiative, and they support governments, they support civil society, they support the private sector and recruiters even to establish that ethical recruitment as a norm in cross-border labor migration. And there is a certification there. And if you yourself are kind of in this sector and want to learn more, I'd highly recommend checking out their website. At the end of this, once I can get into the chat, I will post a couple of links for you to follow today. That might be helpful just going forward. Okay, so now I'm just going to escape out of the presentation here so I can come back to the chat. I think you can still see those organizations though. Okay. So I'm heading to the chat. Okay. And thank you, Wesdean, for taking notes for the session. I really appreciate that. All right. I'm just scrolling up. Thank you. Okay. So Katie asks, is there a way to find out what companies hire or have hired victims of human trafficking or who are complicit in that crime? For sure. So here in, are we, I seem to be frozen. Are we okay? Or is it just me? I'm so sorry. Okay, we're back. Yes, so there are ways to find out kind of companies that have been reported here in Alberta. Now, I'm not sure if this is like a Canada-wide thing that we can look at. I'm guessing it's per province. So I do think that absolutely, and again, I can post that. I've got the link available, and you can just check on those companies via employment standards here in Alberta. So yes, absolutely. And then to be able to see the chat, there's a little arrow. Okay. Sorry, I'm just moving past your participation. Okay, Mark was read. Chelsea says, I think it's important to recognize that the digital platforms are not inherently the issue, but more accurately, yes, it's the people, corporations, and motivations behind them. Absolutely. Technology is a tool, and even digital platforms can be used as a form of accommodation, access, and inclusion for many marginalized groups. I fully agree. Thank you, Chelsea, for that. I love that. And I would fully agree. I think that's there are so many opportunities and so many ways to, while there is exploitation that can happen online, there is so much available to just be of help to folks who, need it the most. And so, I really appreciate you putting that there. Thank you. Yes, so I don't know if I'm saying your name right, Wesdine, I'm sorry. But do some of these individuals end up being forced to live on the street? Absolutely, yeah. I think it would depend on, I can speak to clients that we have at ACT Alberta that have experienced labor trafficking. And absolutely, I think that there is, especially when someone has lost their job, and they're tied to that employer, it's very difficult for that, especially if the status is now irregular, if they're out of status because their employer has exploited them and then not renewed their work permit. Yeah, absolutely. Our clients have, several of them are on the streets. We, of course, work with men, women, and, anyone. We're an inclusive organization. We work tirelessly to get shelter, to, whether it is at a shelter, whether that is assisting with finding an affordable place to live. Things like that. So absolutely, we folks are living on the streets who have experienced this. And when they connect with ACT Alberta, that is like the first thing that we do, is making sure that they're safe, they're healthy, and what's the plan? What are the next steps to get you into housing and shelter? Okay. Katie, you said, I may have missed something. Aisha says, when I was a banker, I had a situation where someone was looking to open an account, but because there's the barrier, they had to open, they had their sponsor speaking on their behalf from this conversation. I can assume that sadly, maybe that could have been a trafficking case. Yes, that does happen. We have some pretty amazing partnerships with banks across Canada now, who recognize this. They're trained to respond to potential cases of exploitation when they see these things come through. It's a pretty new initiative. I think it's maybe like 3 or 4 years old, but there are a few banks across Canada doing this work. And so while it's in its infancy still, I think that there are some really great, there's just a lot of recognition around what human trafficking can look like, especially within that sphere of finance. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but also things are slowly improving, slowly getting better. I've been working at ACT Alberta for 6 years, a total of 10 years, including my volunteer experience. And I will say from back then until now, it has significantly improved. The awareness is just so much higher than it ever was. So things are improving, and there's a lot of hope there. There's a lot of exciting initiatives happening, and people are caring more. So it's awesome. Okay, Katie, also interested in learning more about trafficking of it? Yes, absolutely. Of Indigenous people and missing and murdered Indigenous women. If anyone has info on that or can direct me to the right organization and people, for sure. Today's presentation was, of course, on labor exploitation, racism, and migrant rights. And so that was, we often do, in almost all of our presentations, we do talk about the trafficking of Indigenous women and girls and the huge problem that we have here that is in Canada because of all of the reasons that I'm sure you're aware of, colonialism, racism, systemic, all of the things. We have full presentations that we offer. So yes, absolutely. And we work with a really incredible organization, a couple of really incredible organizations who I can also refer you to. So yes, Katie, I can connect with you after. And actually, just while we're talking, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Chelsea says, Katie, I agree. I'm also curious about the construction industry. I know many people who work in admin and construction, and so many are small, locally owned businesses. They may not be educated enough about this topic to know how to be allies. Absolutely. And to show that they're a safe company. And I think that that's kind of where the IRIS project comes in, but also that awareness piece. So here in Alberta, I'm not sure, Chelsea, where you're located, but we have connections with Enbridge as well as Suncor. They have been really, okay, awesome. Thanks, Chelsea. Yeah, so Enbridge and Suncor have been recently taking steps to raise awareness on human trafficking within Alberta and within their organizations up in the camps and just here on the ground, as well as if we're talking specifically about labor exploitation. Just recently, I had some really great conversations with folks who work at Enbridge who are able to implement change with regards to third-party contractors. So actually vetting those third-party contractors. So for example, Enbridge hires pipe fitters. Okay, well, what does that look like for the pipe fitters? What does this company look like? Like, are they a reasonable price, or is it too good to be true? Is this pricing too good to be true? Let's look into it, So vetting them that way. And then of course, education and awareness is key to understanding and just preventing and disrupting trafficking, whether it's labor, sex trafficking, or the gamut. Awareness is really the starting point. So thank you, Katie. I see your email there. Okay. And yes, I'm just going to put the links in the chat here. If anyone else has any questions, feel free to throw them in the chat now. We can address them. And I will put the links that I promised here as well. Okay. Yes, Chelsea, absolutely. Yeah, we offer presentations. Yeah, for sure. So feel free to email me. Thank you. That's really awesome. Yeah, and we do presentations in person. We travel throughout the province. We have folks located all over Alberta. So wherever you're located, we can plan an in-person. We can do a hybrid. Yeah, happy to connect that way for sure. Awesome. Okay, well, we'll for now, I guess we can just we'll wait a few more minutes, and folks can feel free to ask questions. You can connect with me on the side. But if you want to take back half an hour of your day today or 25 minutes of your day today, you're welcome to. Yeah, be happy to give that back. If anyone else has any questions, please do feel free to throw them in the chat at this point, or comments too are very welcome. Oh, Aisha, can't hear you for some reason. Thanks so much, everyone. I'll put the links in the chat here. Thank you. Thank you, Marie Gabrielle. Thanks, Elizabeth. Thank you so much, everyone. I'm just going to pop this into the chat. Thank you so much, everyone. Katie, great question. So does anyone know the mechanisms by which people are trafficked? I know you mentioned earlier that it's not always people in the back of a van. So how does transportation occur? For sure. So if you're looking at that kind of action, means, and purpose model, the action can be that transportation piece, but that also, so truly transportation can happen through coercion. Someone might think that they're jumping into a car with their, employer to the job that they signed a contract about, like that they were doing, and be taken to a completely different work site. And that's it happens. And then they feel like they have to get paid to live in Canada. They feel like they just have, without being able to stand up for themselves or say anything because of perhaps a language barrier or what have you. They are just forced to do the work. And are unsure of their rights. And so actually an initiative that ACT Alberta has happening with the airports here in Alberta is we've got stickers in both bathrooms, so men and women's bathrooms, that it's a QR code, and it actually takes you to a website with translated materials explaining what your rights as a temporary foreign worker in Canada are. And there are, again, it's translated into many different languages. And so that has proven to be a really great initiative, and we just rolled it out a few months ago. And so hopefully that is a mechanism that helps temporary foreign workers as they come into Canada, and they will then have that in their back pocket with their new employer, that perhaps maybe they're, heading to the washroom after their flight and they're jumping into the car with this brand new employer. Now they know, right? Then now they know what they can expect. They know who to call as well if that employer is, not a good one. Hopefully that answered your question, Katie. There's so much to get into. Yeah, thanks, Katie. Yeah, it was an initiative that we had been really pushing for a really long time because it's so prevalent, especially here in Alberta. So we're really proud of that and happy that it could be rolled out. Chelsea, that is a really smart initiative. What was the study or report you mentioned? That was Alberta based. Yes. That is called In the Shadows, Living and Working as a migrant without status. But I'll put that in the chat here. Okay. I woke up sick this morning, so my apologies. My brain is just it feels very slow right now. So this link I will send to you, and you can download the full report using this link. It's just an incredible report, and it's it talks really candidly about recommendations and what the folks here in Canada, and specifically who've come to Alberta and lost their status, what they're experiencing, everything from not being able to receive healthcare to not being able to, receive shelter provisions because they don't have status. Like, it's just, I hope you enjoy that read. And there are a lot of recommendations, and there are some ways to help and get involved if you're interested. Sorry. And yes, Katie, do you have a list of reported employers from the initiative? Not from the initiative, no. But you can just find those. I'll grab that too. I'll find that. It's on the Employment Standards website. So Yeah, very accessible, which is lovely. Okay. And sorry, let me just check back here if there are any other questions. Chelsea, I'm really passionate about labor advocacy, but I'm out of my depth and around construction because so many labor laws are not the same and it seems to allow for more space for contraventions. Yeah, you're so right. We should connect after this. There's so much to get into. I think that you'll really enjoy this report. It's so helpful. We also have, if you check out the actalberta.org website, we've got a lot of reports on there too that I'm sure you'll find helpful around labor trafficking, around Alberta specific initiatives, all of the good things. So this is our website. Awesome. Okay. Any other questions from anybody? Okay. And while I'm waiting, I will just grab that for you, Chelsea, Katie. Employment standards. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your time and patience with some of the technical difficulties. But I really just love that we could all be here and talk about this today. When it comes to the sector around human trafficking, it's just often it's so, and not to take, this is not to diminish sex trafficking in any way. Of course, we work with both populations who are experiencing labor, sex trafficking, but labor trafficking is just, it seems to be on the back burner for a lot of folks in the sector. And so it's really, it's just really important. And I'm really grateful that people wanted to be here and learn today. And perfect. So thanks for the presentation. I'm wondering what kind of advocacy is needed from Immigration Canada and how to hold the system accountable. I will just refer you to that report, the In the Shadows. I'll paste the link there again. There is incredible recommendations on this report. Specifically, there's several, and they've specifically outlined in this report how to hold the system accountable and exactly what those recommendations would be for Immigration Canada, for IRCC, for even employment standards. So they've made government recommendations, they've made community recommendations, and they've also made recommendations for private sector, public sector. So there's some really great info in there. It's at the very end of the report and you can just kind of search recommendations. There are some incredible ones there. I could just open it and read it to you, but I think that you'll find that really helpful to kind of read through. There's a lot of incredible recommendations that I think would really help. So yeah. Okay. Thank you. That was a great question. Let me know if that link works. Okay, you're welcome. Thank you. Is it Marangese? I'm just butchering everybody's names. I'm so sorry. Thank you. Oh, yay. My great grandfather was Stuart Olson of Stuart Olson Construction. Okay, and I have some suspicions or things I'd like to explore. I'm not sure how to do this because it's my own family. Oh, absolutely, Katie. Email me. I'd be happy to chat with you. I'm sorry to hear that it's probably tough to think about. That makes me very happy. Thank you. Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. I would love to chat with you, Katie, for sure. Awesome. I think sometimes too, it's just, this is not making light of what has happened here in Alberta. It's migrant workers have experienced garbage, it's just been a garbage experience for them in many ways. And so, that's a very blunt and candid way of saying saying that. But I think that back when back in the day when we really needed migrant workers to come through, I don't think, because there just weren't systems put in place, and it's just kind of gotten, yeah, like it's gotten worse over time. There's been learned behaviors from other employers who, are then also perpetuating this crime and like violence against migrant workers as well. It's just, yeah, it's really snowballed. And so I hope, with awareness like this, that we can really start making change to policy and start making provisions that make sense for migrant workers, because they have the exact same rights as Canadian workers. Yeah, it's just about humanizing. So, yeah. Are there situations where international students experience labor trafficking? Absolutely, yeah. Or other trafficking? Yes, yeah. We've had international students from all over the world who have experienced, both types of trafficking, labor trafficking and sex trafficking, absolutely. And again, it's that part about vulnerability, right? And perhaps moving to Alberta, and it's more expensive to live here than perhaps was prepared for. So then there's a part-time job, and students are only able to work a certain number of hours, and so we've had folks who have been clients in the past who have told us about employers forcing them to work more if they want to keep their job, but then threatening deportation, like really having their thumb kind of on that student because they've worked too many hours. So if that employer reports them, they could potentially be deported. So there are situations like that, and then that, of course, that the student is trying to do their study, they're trying to do well in their studies, but they're also being forced to work to live. So yeah, it definitely happens. And then of course sex trafficking can happen as well for a myriad of reasons. Yeah, absolutely. And we do have, so every month we have on the third Thursday of every month, if you look on our website, you're more than welcome to join. We've got a lunch and learn that actually touches on both labor and sex trafficking and kind of who is experiencing what here in Alberta. So I would highly recommend joining one of those. And then again, if anybody here is frontline or service provider or construction, like if you are just doing work that you think, well, maybe we do see human trafficking, or maybe we do see exploitation happening here, please do feel free to connect with me, and we can, we are actually funded to provide free education and awareness around human trafficking and to tailor that training to your sector. So we love doing it. It's our passion. So please do connect with us. And then please, again, maybe take a quick photo of the different organizations up here on the screen. But if you're interested in volunteering or learning, these are some incredible organizations doing the work specifically around like refugees, newcomer rights, and doing that similar kind of assistance as ACT Alberta. It looks like like my camera has shut off. Sorry, everybody. Anyway, okay, well, there it is. Great. All right, well, we are at 11:50. So if any of you, okay, good. Thanks, Bianca. Yeah, if anyone else has any questions, please feel free to pop them in the chat. And if not, then I will give you back 10 minutes of your lives. Oh, perfect. Yes. Please do. We would love to have any feedback at all. That would be really great. So thank you, Lizeth, for putting that in there. Thank you, Katie. Yes, please do. Okay. Have an amazing Sunday, everyone. And please do reach out anytime. We're here Monday to Friday, 8:30 to 4:30 here in Alberta. And then if you do have any other questions specifically around human trafficking and it's after hours, or it can't wait, please do call the human trafficking hotline. That is, again, it's 1-833-900-1010. Thank you so much, Lizette. Yeah, it's a lot. It's like drinking through a fire hose. I'm sorry, everyone. There's so much information and it's just not enough time to get through it all. But we are very happy to provide resources and extra training to anyone who wants. Thanks, everyone. Have a lovely weekend.